It began the way most tragedies do, quietly, without fanfare, with something so small and seemingly insignificant that no one thought it could grow into anything more. For Sarah Khan, a devoted teacher who had given 20 years of her life to a private school in her city, it started with a whisper in the staff room. A few colleagues had turned their heads when she entered, conversations dropped mid-sentence, papers shuffled too quickly. She had felt it, the shift, the subtle rearranging of loyalties and smiles, the way people avoided her eyes. Sarah had always been more than a teacher. To her students, she was a mentor, a confidant, the one who stayed late after class to guide them through essays, the one who bought supplies for those who couldn't afford them, the one who believed in them even when they did not believe in themselves. To the administration, however, she was a problem. She questioned decisions, fought against unfair policies, and challenged the headmaster when she believed students' futures were at stake. That kind of devotion, in a system built on favoritism and silent agreements, made her dangerous. The betrayal revealed itself in layers. First came the rumors, softly spoken, but sharp enough to wound. A parent complained that Sarah had been too harsh, another whispered that she played favorites. Then came the official warnings, letters from the principal accusing her of misconduct, of failing to follow procedure, of stepping outside her role. She knew where it came from. She had stood against him too many times, refusing to stay silent when money meant more to him than the children. Still, the speed with which her colleagues turned on her was a pain she had not anticipated. The final blow came in the form of termination. No ceremony, no dignity. One morning, she was called into the office, told her services were no longer required, and escorted out like a criminal. 20 years of her life reduced to a signature on a paper and a box of belongings carried to her car. That evening she sat in her living room, staring at the walls, her identity hollowed out. For a time she wept. For a time she grieved. But grief has a way of transforming when anger takes root. Sarah decided she would not disappear quietly. If they had conspired to destroy her life, she would show them that betrayal has consequences. She began slowly, carefully. She had kept copies of documents over the years, financial statements that didn't add up, records of tuition fees that seemed to vanish, memos approving questionable expenditures. She had emails too, threads of correspondence that revealed favoritism in admissions, bribes masked as donations, and a principal who lined his pockets while preaching about values and integrity. For months, she gathered everything, weaving the threads into a story so clear and undeniable that no one could ignore it. She spoke to parents, to journalists, even to former teachers who had left under suspicious circumstances. One by one, they came forward, their stories aligning with hers, painting a picture of corruption and manipulation that stretched back years. When she finally released the evidence, it was not with rage but with precision. A carefully crafted report landed in the hands of the board of directors, local newspapers, and even government education officials. Within weeks, investigations began. The headmaster who had orchestrated her downfall was suspended, then dismissed. His allies scrambled to save themselves, but the evidence was too overwhelming. Parents, enraged that their children had been treated as pawns in a game of greed, demanded reform. Sarah did not stop there. She knew that revenge was not just about destroying those who destroyed you, it was about reclaiming power. She started her own tutoring center, modest at first, but built on the principles she had always lived by: fairness, dedication, and belief in the potential of every child. Word spread quickly. Parents who had once been deceived by the school's polished facade now brought their children to Sarah, knowing she was someone who would fight for them rather than against them. Years later, when people spoke of the scandal that had nearly ruined the school, they also spoke of the woman who refused to be broken. Betrayal had stolen her career, her reputation, even her peace of mind for a time. But in her refusal to surrender, she had carved something greater, a legacy of resilience, a reminder that silence only serves the betrayer, and that sometimes the truest form of retribution is to rise so high that those who tried to destroy you must watch from the shadows. Sarah never called it revenge, but in the quiet of her heart, she knew that was exactly what it was. The teacher who had been cast aside had become the teacher they could never forget. The years that followed did not soften Sarah. If anything, they sharpened her, carving away the hesitation that had once kept her silent. Betrayal leaves scars, and though she had built something new, there were nights when she still lay awake, staring into the dark, replaying the humiliation of being escorted out of the school like a criminal. Each time she remembered, the fire in her chest flared again, reminding her that her war was not yet finished. Her new tutoring center grew rapidly. What began as a single rented room expanded into a proper institute, with classrooms filled beyond capacity. Parents flocked to her, grateful for the honesty and transparency she brought. But her rise wasn't only about teaching. It was about power, the kind she had once fought against, but now wielded with intent. She had influence and she knew how to use it. Former students, now lawyers, journalists, even politicians, remembered her kindness and repaid it by offering their loyalty. Slowly, Sarah began to construct a network, one that stretched into places her old enemies had never imagined she could reach. The principal who had betrayed her tried to rebuild his life. He opened another school under a different name, hoping the scandal would fade. Sarah did not let it. Quietly, she leaked documents to local media every time he tried to climb back into respectability. An expose here, a whistleblower testimony there, always enough to keep his name tainted. Parents avoided him, teachers refused to work with him, and every attempt at reinvention collapsed under the weight of her precision strikes. As for the colleagues who had once turned their backs on her, she did not forget them either. One had spread the very rumors that poisoned her reputation. Sarah saw to it that the truth about her falsified qualifications surfaced at just the right moment. Another who had eagerly testified against her during the investigation found his own private tutoring business mysteriously under scrutiny for tax evasion, evidence Sarah had discreetly passed along. Each betrayal was answered, not with violence or rage, but with carefully orchestrated retribution, designed to sting where it hurt most. Over time, whispers spread. People began to say Sarah was untouchable, that she carried a kind of invisible power. Students adore her, parents trusted her, but her enemies spoke her name with caution, as though invoking it might summon consequences. She had become more than a teacher. She was a force, a reminder that those who betray loyalty for ambition often write their own downfall. And yet, in her private moments, Sarah felt the weight of what she had become. She had started with grief, been driven by anger, and built something meaningful out of ruins. But revenge had seeped into her veins so deeply that it had become part of her identity. She no longer sought only justice. She sought balance, a world where betrayal never went unanswered. She carried her scars like armor, and though she still stood before her students with warmth in her voice, behind her eyes burned the memory of every hand that once tried to push her down. To the world, she was the woman who had risen after being destroyed, a beacon of resilience. But Sarah herself knew the truth, that her legacy was not just in the children she taught, but in the shadows she cast over those who had wronged her. For them, her existence was the punishment. Every day they woke and saw her thriving was another reminder that the teacher they had tried to bury had come back stronger, and that she would never forgive, never forget. It was not forgiveness that gave her peace. It was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that betrayal had met its match. There came a point when Sarah's revenge no longer required effort. It became self-sustaining, like a storm that gathers its own winds. Her enemies had grown paranoid. The principal who once strutted through hallways now lived in constant fear of exposure. Even years later, he would flinch whenever a journalist called or when an unfamiliar envelope arrived in the mail. He had no proof that Sarah was behind it all, but he knew. That knowledge was the real punishment, the anticipation of a strike, the dread of a past mistake surfacing at any moment. Sarah had mastered patience. She never rushed her retribution. She watched, she waited, and when the timing was right, she acted. A whispered word to the right ear, a set of documents appearing in the hands of the right inspector, a truth delivered at precisely the moment it would wound the deepest. It was like teaching, she thought in a strange way. Just as she had once guided students step by step toward knowledge, she now guided her betrayers toward ruin, one careful move at a time. Her former colleagues suffered in silence. One, who had testified against her, found herself shunned by the very institution she had defended. Parents distrusted her, students mocked her, and opportunities dried up until she resigned in shame. Another, who had whispered lies in staff meetings, discovered that Sarah's network of loyal ex-students included someone in the hiring committee of his dream university post. The rejection letter he received was brief and brutal, but Sarah imagined the sting in his chest as he read it. Still, the most powerful revenge Sarah carried out was not in the destruction of reputations or careers. It was in her success. Her institute grew into one of the most respected learning centers in the city. Parents paid willingly, not for prestige or connections, but because they trusted her. The children she taught excelled, winning scholarships and opportunities that had once been hoarded by the corrupt school she left behind. With every award her students earned, every milestone they achieved, Sarah's victory deepened. She was building the future while her enemies withered in the past. Yet, beneath her calm surface, there was something darker growing. Sarah had come to relish the quiet power she held, the way one whisper from her could alter the course of a life. It was intoxicating. Sometimes, when she looked in the mirror, she no longer recognized the woman staring back, the teacher who had once stayed up nights grading papers, fueled only by the desire to see her students thrive. Now, she was something else. Something harder. Something sharper. The line between justice and obsession began to blur. At first, she had gone after only those who had betrayed her. But over time, she noticed others, petty tyrants in other schools, administrators who silenced young teachers, men in positions of power who exploited the vulnerable. She found herself collecting information, digging into lives that had never crossed hers directly. It was no longer about her own betrayal. It was about punishing betrayal wherever she saw it. She told herself it was justice. But in the stillness of the night, when the whispers of conscience crept in, she wondered if she was becoming the very thing she had once despised. Her revenge had started with a wound. Now it had become her identity. And while the city admired her, while parents trusted her and students adored her, those who knew her past whispered a different kind of story, the story of a teacher wronged, who turned her pain into power and who never stopped sharpening the blade of her retribution. To them, she was no longer just Sarah Khan. She was a warning,